And I will be presenting my first ever iPhone app, iOS school BusTimer. Okay, so before I get into my project, let me please introduce myself briefly. So my name is Leonard Choo. I'm a second year at K University. I was born in Seoul, South Korea, and then I lived in the US for about 7 years since middle school until I went to NYU for a couple years. And then I went to the Korean military for 2 years. And then I came to K University afterward. I did programming since like NYU, but I only decided to commit to like actually be a programmer about like last year. Until then, I did a lot of studying like language, so I'm fluent in Japanese as well. So I speak 3 languages. But yeah, after doing many things, I was like, yeah, I think I want to be a programmer. So I love Apple. I love the iOS apps. So I thought I wanted to give it a try. I also sing. I also play a lot of video games. So yeah, it's just me. So all right, let's get started. So the BusTimer. So if you go to this URL, this is actually the school BusTimer that is already made by someone else. Just made in web. And I think this is just beautifully done. This app is already pretty good, except it has some few problems, and I don't think it was getting managed that well. The data was fine, thankfully, but like sometimes the buttons, especially the changing this button right here, reverse button, sometimes doesn't work. So you have to press it like many times to make it work. So I have a suspicion that someone wrote the code like this to make it work. But yeah, some frustrations like this. I was like, okay, maybe I could give this one a try as my first like app project. So actually, before I started writing one in iOS, because I never had experience in Swift, I wrote one in Android using Java, and this implemented text-to-speech API. So this was meant for my friend who was also in our group, who is blind. So he wanted a way to know like how when the bus comes, but he couldn't use the BusTimer app that was here because it didn't really support his accessibility feature. So I made this, and then just about like a week after, he lost his Android tablet. So he was like, okay, I use iPhone, can you make one in iOS? So I was like, okay, I'll give it a try. So yeah, I started working on the iOS version. It took me a long time because I still had a lot of schoolwork to do. So I was working in assembly, C, Python, and then I was working on this thing. So I was expecting that I'll go through these 4 steps within like 6 months period and I'll be just done. I mean, it's just simple BusTimer, you know, how complicated could it be? Well, it turns out I was very wrong. So this is what I thought was going to happen. So I'm going to parse the JSON data, just code the main logic in Swift, connect to the UI, and then just deploy it in test flight, and then I demonstrate it here. So actually, part of the reason why I decided to present here today was because I kind of wanted to blackmail myself, so that I'm like motivated and forced to actually make something instead of just like being lazy. But this is actually what really happened. So parsing JSON was a bit like more complicated than I thought because there was a library called Sweet2JSON. But when I first looked at the tutorial, they didn't really use that because they used decodable protocol. So I tried that, but I soon ran into many problems using that. So I just decided to switch to Sweet2JSON. And then when I moved to the main logic, that's when I ran into real trouble because it was my first time coding in Swift. So like all the optionals and callbacks and asynchronous dispatch queue and everything. It was kind of driving me crazy because I had no idea why some values were having nil in them. And it was actually because the thread was splitted, but like I had no idea. So it took me like a while to figure that out. And then connecting to the UI, I also had a lot of trouble doing this because I didn't really know the fundamentals of view controllers and everything. So I actually worked until like 6 a.m. this morning just trying to get a very simple feature working. Okay, and yeah, I couldn't really get to the deploy stage, but I have the demo here that I can demonstrate with the simulator. So maybe I should share this later. Okay, so I'll jump into demo right now. It's probably not a clean code, so please be generous. Okay, so this is currently what I have. I didn't really implement any beautiful designs there, but basically SFC is my school and Shonanda is where most people live. Most people get on the bus to go to school. Just clicking on this, you can reverse the direction. Oh, that crashed. Well, I will work on that. I didn't expect that, okay. But anyhow, so the data for the bus, we script the data. So there are like 3 other people that are helping me out on this project. So we script the data from the Leonard Choo bus homepage, webpage, because they didn't really have the open API, so we had to scrape everything. And then we just put it into the web service called like MyJSON, and then we fetch the data from MyJSON using a safety.json here, and then URL session. And then I calculated the time difference there. And then yeah, this is basically the result of it. I'm hoping that I can add features like the list of buses here with the table view, so that you can see not only just next bus, but like next buses as well. And also probably like the alarm feature, so you get notified when the next bus is coming, because the limitation of the previous like web app was that it was kind of broken, and also it couldn't really give you any like native features. So these will be the things I'm adding. And yeah, this is basically the demo. Okay, so going back to the slide. There are a couple of things that I had difficulty with when I was working on this, and I wanted to share this in case if there's anyone who wants to like code their first project in iOS. So the callback thing was pretty difficult. So basically, the first half, top half, I have 3 lines: URL session, and callback. So I call them in like separate functions in like one main thread. So I'll call the first URL session, and then I would finish that, and then I'll go into the second URL session, or at least that's what I thought. What actually happened was that URL session, when it fetches the data, it has a subthread, so they all start asynchronously, which means that they're not necessarily waiting for the first URL session to finish. So what I had to do was that I put those second URL session and the callback within each function to make it work. And that was not easy to find a solution to, because there are so many people suggesting you should use the semaphore, you should use the dispatch sync, and I was just like, yeah, no, it just keeps failing in my thread. Okay, and then second part, so this is a bad design. So I have the view controller, and then there's a parenthesis after view controller in line 198. So it says, fatal, unexpectedly found nil while unwrapping optional value. I had no idea why this was optional, because I calculated the elapsed time, and that cannot be nil. What actually happened was that I created this update view function outside of the view controller class. So when I referred to the view controller with the parentheses, I was creating the new instance of it instead of actually referring to the existing one. So I was failing there. So just a couple of tips that I wanted to share as I learned. And yep, that is it for my presentation. And thank you.
Any questions?
Any feedback's welcome.
You mentioned that one of the reasons you were doing this for your friend was for like the voiceover features and accessibility. Were you able to add that to this app, or is that something like in your next steps?
Right. So that's actually really interesting because first when we began this project, we were imagining all these features that accessibility features that he could use. So we thought about adding like a gesture function, so he doesn't actually have to fumble and find the button to use the speech function and everything. And we thought this was all cool. Except when we actually talked to him, he said, "No, I'm already using the accessibility feature supported by Apple. So just please have in like a native supported UI label, and it should be fine." So I was like, "Okay, then I guess I'll make one that's geared towards everyone at school." And yeah, that's how this happened.
Any other questions?
Yeah, so you previously said that you did the first app in Android. So by making the one for in Swift and the one in Java, which one do you prefer? Coding in Android or iOS? Be careful of the answer.
Well, definitely, the app I made was very basic, so the platform didn't really matter. But if I were to make some more advanced app that requires optimization for every device and everything, I don't think I can do Android because it's impossible to, make it work for all the devices. So I prefer the iOS. Good answer.
In terms of accessibility, how does Android compare with iOS? Or you said you had to use that to some degree, right?
Yeah, I actually didn't really think of that. So for the Android one, I just had two giant buttons, if you can see, that if you click on it, that kind of read. So I didn't really look into the accessibility feature, but that was usable and that was enough for me.
Do you download the JSON data every time you run the app, or just once and cache it locally?
I think that's what I should do. Yeah, but for now, this is just fetching data every time it connects. There are many problems, like I shouldn't be calculating the max bus every second, so that is another thing I'm going to have to work on.
What kind of plans do you have for the future for building this out or releasing?
So I'll be excited to implement a lot of features that are on the browser that was broken. Also add different lines of buses that goes to not only Shonandai but also other stations. And also I'm hoping I can add notifications and maybe add something on my Apple Watch because that is much easier for people to see. Yeah, I think that would be.
All right, thanks a lot.
Thank you.